Can we talk at this moment about a long-term new Cold War? Who are the protagonists and which are its futures?
No, I don't think the Cold War moniker works at all. First of all, the relationship that Russia has with the West is very different. During the Cold War, there was almost a literal wall. There was not just a physical wall. There were no economic relationships. There were no political relationships. There were no personal relationships. So there were no diplomatic relationships. I mean, the two sides basically were separate. Today, that's not the world that we have. I mean, we compete with the Russians, but there are economic ties, there are cultural ties. So it's very, very, very different, and the goal is different. And I think this is something that the United States and Western Europe share in common. During the Cold War, we looked at the Soviet Union and we said, this is a society which is detrimental to the future of humanity. There's no freedom, there's no opportunity for people to realize their potential. And the strategy in the Cold War was essentially one day we would like to see the Soviet Union go away because it was a massive oppressor of people. President Reagan called it an evil empire, and he said it won't stand forever. People look at Russia, they might not like the Russian government. They're rightfully concerned about Russian foreign policy and meddling in other countries and actually invading countries like Ukraine and Georgia. But on the other hand, Russia's not going anywhere. The geography is the same. What we want Russia to do is essentially to stop destabilizing Western Europe. I mean, if they want to live under Putin and have a terrible economy, that's kind of their problem, right? So in the Cold War, it was about seeing the end to an evil empire. Today, it's really about Russians leaving other people alone so they can live their lives.
Metaphorically speaking, in your opinion, where would you place the new border of NATO? In concrete terms, which are the future of NATO-Russia agreement? It is only suspended or it is expected to be cancelled?
NATO, the transatlantic community, is an association of free nations. So I don't think there's a border to that, right? So countries can freely join NATO if they want. And I think that should remain the policy, that NATO is open. And I think, for example, someday I would like to see Georgia join NATO. And I think the relationship between U.S. and Russia, really, it depends on Russia. I think the Western commitment to a free and open transatlantic community is not going to change. Russia can either live with that or not. I actually think that we haven't seen the bottom of U.S. or NATO-Russian relations. I think, for example, the future of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty between the United States and NATO, I think that's an open question whether that sustains over time. The New START nuclear treaty, whether that goes. So I don't expect NATO-Russian relations to improve anytime soon. I largely place the blame of that on Russia. I don't think NATO is opposed to better relations. But if Russians want better relations, essentially Russia has to be a better neighbor to Western Europe.
Do you think the dominant position will be disturbed in the Black Sea region? Will there be a number one at the military level and another economically number one?
Well, the Black Sea, the security and peace and stability of the Black Sea is obviously a very, very complex question because of the multiple players. Much depends on the position that Turkey holds, and it also depends on how other countries respond to Russian influence. I mean, Russia has systemically tried to increase its position and control over the Black Sea, and if that goes unchecked, they'll continue to do that. So I think, in part, the ball is in the court of Romania and other countries that border the Black Sea on developing the capacity and capability to defend their own interests. I think that's an important variable. I think the United States is more concerned about the peace and security of the Black Sea and the southern flank of NATO. So I think the United States is willing and anxious to do more to partner with countries in the region to help bring peace and stability. Part of that will also depend on the policies that Turkey chooses to have in the future. So we're in a very dynamic phase. I could see if Romania and our NATO partners stand up and better protect and defend their own territorial space, that will actually contribute to the long-term stability in the region.
How do you see the next action of Russian Federation in this region? Do you think there will be military measures or rather offensive diplomacy? So
largely what we've seen from the Russians is to look for areas of weakness where they can exploit the inattention or the lack of security and focus from Western Europe and NATO and the European Union. So I think many people look, for example, at the Baltic area and say that NATO has done a good job of reassuring and bringing peace and stability. I think that's similar in Central Europe. So I think most people look at areas of concern, number one being the Western Balkans as an area where potentially Russian influence might exacerbate tensions and destabilize the regions, and then more broadly in the Black Sea. So I think those are the areas of concern. But conversely, I think whether it's from NATO or the US or the European Union, those are also the areas where people are looking at bringing more reassurance, bringing more stability, working more with regional partners to ensure continued stability in the region and economic growth and more confidence among people. So, and I think that will is likely to create a more stable situation.